I went in, she was sitting there in a motel room with a kilo of cocaine on the bed and two bikers basically helping her package it up to smaller amounts. That was sort of the insanity that I was living in.
Gordon Lownds, well, he's lived multiple lives. He grew up in Toronto, but clashed with a critical father, an older stepbrother who bullied him until he finally fought back. At 16, he said, "I've had enough." He left home, hustled at carnivals, learned probably one of the best business lessons of all time.
It was a good fit the minute I started working there. The energy, I like the carnival people, not your traditional kind of folks to work with.
Continued to work at odd jobs and then packed in some degrees, one in philosophy and an MBA. Turns out he was a brilliant business person. By his 40s, he co-founded Sleep Country Canada with Stephen Gunn and Christine Magee, and later on, Listen Up Canada. And these businesses changed how Canadians buy mattresses and how they approach hearing health. But at the very height of his career, on his 48th birthday in October 1998, Gordon tried crack cocaine for the first time.
I've seen it in the movies. I've never done drugs before. I was fearless for most of my life, and I thought I was invincible.
And almost overnight, and within this 1,000 days, he went from leading a celebrated retail success to shooting up in Vancouver's East Hastings alley, spending nearly $1 million, living a double life, and almost losing everything.
I've since learned that people who are high achievers and typically self-made business people, their biggest problem is asking for help.
His memoir, Cracking Up, traces that 1,000-day descent and the long, uneven path to recovery. And today we're going to walk through his rise, fall, and redemption.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Thank you for listening to Chatter That Matters, presented by RBC. If you can, please subscribe to the podcast. And ratings and reviews, well, they're always welcome and they're always appreciated.
Gordon, welcome to Chatter That Matters.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Fantastic book. Certainly we'll put it in the posted notes and encourage a lot of people to read it. But before we really get into you leaving the carnival, which to me was just a moment where you said, I'm grabbing the rudder in life, just take me back a little bit to that childhood in Toronto. Yeah, I guess you had an older stepbrother, Tyler, and your younger sister, Pam?
So he was my brother, but he was adopted. He wasn't a stepbrother.
Okay.
Lived in a middle-class family upbringing kind of thing. The challenge I had for whatever reason at an early age, I had a real problem with authority figures, which is not good when you have a father. And I had a bit of a smart-ass mouth. There was friction in the household, which is why I left.
You mentioned your book. By 15, you're paying your own room and board. And then you decided that I can take care of myself. So, a lot of people, I guess at that age, think about it's time to move. But that's a big decision. What gave you the courage to leave home, and how did you end up at a carnival?
Throughout my life, I've been able to outlast adversity. The home situation was just nothing that I was willing to put up with. There wasn't any sort of, physical abuse or anything like that. But I just thought that there must be a better way for me to live my life. And I guess I had the courage to step into that role and take care of myself.
Leaving that early, do you think there's any lessons from your dad who you rebelled against in those early ages that you carried with you all your life?
He liked to control things. I had a problem being controlled and told what to do and what to think. And it was just something that was inherent in me. I just rebelled against it. He and I never reconciled. When somebody asked me what my relationship was with my father, I basically say, I don't care. And the only good thing he ever did for me was leave me his handicap parking pass when he passed away.
In an interview you had with Adam Mendler, you described the carnival games. A lot of people would just go in there and kind of work to live, but you took 10% of the revenue, you paid your staff, you covered prizes, and you call that carnival hustle as one of your, really an entrepreneurial classroom. To me, very few people would have taken that kind of lesson out of there.
It was a good fit the minute I started working there. I liked the energy. I liked the carnival people because they were, not your traditional kind of folks to work with. They had a bit of an attitude. They have what I refer to as a selective sense of morality. And I just enjoy the interaction with the public and just seeing how they are motivated by greed, how you can manipulate people by basically how you talk to them and how you present things to them. It was just a really energizing experience for me.
I have to believe that people that would get into that world and actually thrive within it, it would be tough to leave it and go back into kind of the rigor and discipline of university and education. I'm curious why you jumped off that path versus just deciding that, hustling would be your DNA.
What initially caused me to sort of step away from that business was I wanted to be a professional musician. Ironically, I stayed working at the CNE just for the 2.5-week fair until I was 32 years old. I used to take my holidays and go and work at the CNE because I made a lot of money and I just enjoyed, the environment. But, the music career didn't work out. I realized that I would never be great at it, ran out of money. And I took a job as a part-time warehouse worker at Christmas time. That's basically where I started, I entered sort of the traditional business world. Turns out that I guess I have ambition and I was fearless at the time. So other people who I was working with would not take a chance. They wouldn't risk, losing their job. They had responsibilities like a, wife and a family and a mortgage. And I had none of that. And so I was a little bit outrageous and I was very outspoken and it worked well for me. And I got promoted very, very quickly and I was a fast learner. So I survived and prospered in that world.
So you meet up with Steve Gunn, I guess, in 1988, who becomes your soulmate and your partner, and you co-founded Kendrick Capital. I mean, how did that come together? Because it seems like you're jumping from one path to another, each time succeeding on it. But this case, you're going to get into the leverage buyout business, which to me is normally people 20, 25 years older than you that have acquired a lot of experience and a lot of capital feel that they can buy a business and do better with it. But again, was this fearless attitude that says, if they can do it, so can I?
I was working with Heather Reisman and her consulting firm called Paradigm Consulting at the time. One of her clients was her husband, who was Jerry Schwartz, who owned Onyx Corp, and he was in the leverage buyout business. And I did a number of projects for his company, and Steve and I happened to meet, and we, chatted away. I left Heather's group, went to work on a special project for the Bronson family, and Steve kept saying, what are you doing and what's going on? And he said, well, can I participate in that? Because it sounds more interesting and a lot more fun. And when that project finished, we looked around and said, what are we good at? And Steve was an ex-McKinsey consultant, so he's a very smart guy. And I was, thinking about Jerry Schwartz's Onyx business. And I said, the only reason he's making money because of people like me who've got the brain power and the ability to sort of figure stuff out. And the only thing that Steve and I don't have is capital. We figured, we'll go out and find some acquisition opportunities and then attract the capital that we need to do it. So we bought Color Your World in 1989 for $100 million on a leverage buyout. We partnered with a company in New York at the forefront of doing leverage buyouts. And the other partner was CIBC Wood Gundy. That was successful. And then we continued to do that kind of thing and then ended up buying Simmons Mattress in 1990 on a leverage buyout with the same partners. That was how we became, familiar with the mattress business, which led eventually to Sleep Country Canada.
And Christine Magee came in, and she was kind of the lead singer of the band, I would say, but very involved in HR. You were the marketing genius behind it because almost overnight you did what Pizza did, is you made a name and a jingle and a call to action part of everybody's vernacular.
We'd known Christine for 6 or 7 years prior to Sleep Country, and she was actually working for a national bank, and they were one of the bankers behind the leverage buyouts that we'd done. When we developed the idea for Sleep Country, we wanted a female president who was a legitimate, business person who, had some charisma, could actually carry off being the active president of a company. And Steve and I just wanted to stay in the background and drive the business forward. She agreed to take a chance on us because she knew us well. Christine and I moved to Vancouver to start the business. And my role was basically I did all of, the marketing, the advertising, the real estate, the construction, and her role was basically managing the day-to-day business, which is, the stores, the sales force, the distribution center, the accounting, the admin, share the responsibilities.
You're in Vancouver, October 1998. The business is really taking off, but you hook up with the wrong person. Take us back to that moment, because at the time, it seems like life couldn't be better for you.
So we started Sleep Country in 1994 because I was doing the advertising. Our advertising agency was in Seattle. And so I was traveling back and forth to work with the agency every couple of weeks. And in 1995, I'd gotten divorced. The family had moved back to Toronto. I was on my own, working crazy hours, 7 days a week, a high level of stress in my life. And on one of those trips to Seattle, I found myself at loose ends one evening with nothing to do, and I didn't bring any work with me. And so just to decompress and sort of forget about the stress and all the stuff that was going on in the business front, I went to a local strip club. There, I basically made some bad decisions, met the ultimate femme fatale. I saw her for about a year. Every couple of weeks I was in Seattle, so we'd get together, and it was fun, and it was like a vacation for me because I could completely forget about the business and just enjoy myself once in a while. And then she arrived in Vancouver one weekend and said she wanted to move in with me. And so I didn't invite her. She sort of landed on my doorstep, and I said, okay. And then within 2 months of her living with me, I discovered that she had a drug problem. I came home one day early, and she was all messed up. And she broke down and admitted she'd been an addict since she was 16 years old. She was now like 28 years old. Tried to get her into treatment. It didn't work. She really wasn't ready to sort of sort her life out. And I told her she was going to have to go because I couldn't have that kind of stress, at home when I was trying to run the business and running around doing all the work stuff. She basically said, I'll agree to leave, but why don't you just try it with me once? Maybe you can be more empathetic about how it makes me feel and why it's difficult for me to stop. My attitude was fine. I could do cocaine. Like, I've seen it in the movies. I've never done drugs before, so I had no experience with it. I was fearless for most of my life, and I thought I was invincible. We tried it, and my first experience with cocaine was doing crack cocaine, which is highly addictive. It wasn't the sort of more common snorting approach. It was probably the best feeling of my life that I had ever experienced. It was complete euphoria. Everything that bothered me in the world or that I worried about just disappeared, instantly. It felt great. The other problem with the cocaine, that in my case, it was like adding rocket fuel to my libido. And I'm here with this sexy young girl. I'm high on cocaine, and my inhibitions have completely, evaporated. And we ended up partying, for the entire weekend. I drove to work on Monday morning saying, wow, that was a lot of fun. We could do this on the weekends, and it's just another way to relax and enjoy myself. Within 6 months, I knew I was getting into trouble because I was having trouble getting to work on Monday. So sometimes I wouldn't get there until Tuesday. I was becoming obsessive about wanting to get high because it felt so good. I finally crossed that threshold that I describe as when you go from being a recreational user to an addict. It basically can be characterized by three things. First of all, you have a compulsion that is very difficult to control, and you get to the point where you don't pay attention to the consequences. You're using compulsively, you're out of control, and you ignore the consequences. It got worse and worse, and then within a year, because addicts always want to figure out how to get higher and higher, I ended up injecting cocaine with her. I'd gone from sort of a university level of cocaine use to a postgraduate level that most people can never even imagine. And I could never imagine having gone there.
There's such a price that you paid for this, but just the monetary, you talk about $700,000 at least on cocaine. And then Annabelle, this femme fatale, decides because she has some videos of you, she can start blackmailing you. This must very rapidly have turned into what was the high of your life, must have become quite quickly the low of your life.
I always told people I'd rather, live on the edge, experience the highs, but willing to accept what the lows are. And I didn't want to live in the middle, in the mediocre spectrum of the world. But I never imagined ever becoming an addict. It never was on my radar screen. Yeah, I went right off the deep end very, very quickly. It was devastating. It got to the point after 2 years, the relationship with her was insanely toxic. We argued all the time, and the only time we didn't argue was when we were getting high. Sort of carrying on the charade at work that I was okay and, lying about what I was doing and where I was getting to the point where it was virtually unmanageable. It's a miracle that people didn't find out that I had a problem. She eventually went back to Seattle. With her out of the picture, I'll be able to get myself clean and sober because I tried a few times with her there And it was impossible because she was using cocaine in the next room and I'm trying to get clean. It doesn't work well. It became worse and worse. And then she started blackmailing me, basically threatening to tell people that I was a drug addict, and had locked her in my apartment and taken her passport and all this other stuff. Kept demanding more and more money every couple of weeks. And then eventually she threatened to have my family killed in Toronto and put a contract out with the Hells Angels, who she knew quite well. She demanded, I think, $50,000 at that point to not do that. And I said, okay, I'll give it to you. I'm going to do it in person, not by wire transfer or whatever. I started to record her telephone conversations with me on a tape recorder. And I phoned the Seattle Police Department and the DEA and basically said, if I want to press charges, do I have a case here for extortion? And they said, absolutely, you're dead on. Let us know what we can do. I took a trip to Seattle to meet up with her and pay her off. I went in, she was sitting there in a motel room with a kilo of cocaine on the bed and two bikers basically helping her package it up to smaller amounts. I gave her 10 grand, not 50. I played the tape for them and I said, if you ever threaten me or call me again, I'm going to turn this over to the police department and you're going to be in deep shit. And when I left on the way back to Vancouver, I phoned the DEA and said, if you want to get someone who's got a ton of cocaine and a couple of dealers, here's where they are right now. That was it. So she was gone. And then in May of 1998, things got so bad that I didn't think I could carry on, the High Wire Act anymore. And I was terrified that someone was going to find out that I had a drug problem. I took a leave of absence from work, told my partners I'd be back, give me 3 months, and, I should be able to get myself together. In that 3-month period, it just got worse and worse. I was using cocaine, on a daily basis, farther and farther downhill. And then because I couldn't make it back on Labor Day, I think 2 days late, I finally broke down. I called my partner, Steve Gunn, in Toronto and said, I've got a cocaine problem. I'm really sorry. And I was expecting him to just go off the deep end and yell and scream and, be upset with me. What I didn't expect is what happened, which is he basically said, I'm really sorry. What can I do to help?
Did he know what was going on? Or just because you're in the stress of building a business, everybody's burning out to a certain level. And so you can get away with it, because to be heavily addicted to drugs, and as you described, trying to play both lives, none of your family or none of your partners or your friends really understood what was going on.
Addicts and alcoholics are known for being high functioning. I guess we're just gifted actors. I was able to carry this off from a business point of view. And people were all working hard. So it wasn't anybody particularly paying, close attention to me. And as long as I was delivering on what I was supposed to be doing, it wasn't a cause for anybody to be concerned. I've since learned that people who are high achievers and typically self-made business people, their biggest problem is asking for help. I couldn't do it. I was too proud, terrified of the consequences. And I didn't ask Steve for help. I basically said, I'm done. Just take me out and shoot me. And when he offered to help, basically it was either accept what he was offering or just continue to use and die. That was a pretty stark choice for me.
In your book, you describe Bellwood Rehab. And in some ways, I almost saw you as the son back at home with the tyrant leader, in this case, instead of your dad being Dr. Koenig. And you're resisting everything he's trying to do. And he finally calls you this self-centered narcissist, possibly bipolar ass.
Yep.
How did you take that? Because every other time in life when somebody's pushed you that hard, you've run off to a carnival.
When they finally handed me over to Dr. Koenig, he was sort of known in Bellwood as handling the hard cases. And I guess I was one. For whatever reason, I just clicked with him. I sat down, he asked me the right questions, he listened. It became clear to me that if I was going to get better, this was a guy that could help me. He was the kind of person that I didn't think I could bullshit him. I didn't think I could fool him. So I had to be just brutally honest. One of the things that happens with addicts and alcoholics is when we get clean and sober, a lot of us sit there and say, wow, I've solved my problem. But by the way, I've got some mental health problems that I didn't even know about because I was using, drugs and, I was all messed up. Dr. Koenig was really instrumental in helping me understand that. And when he told me that, I wasn't surprised. The biggest sort of diagnosis was that I was clinically depressed. I'm still taking antidepressants today, so I guess I'd been that way for quite some time. And, the adrenaline that I got from doing all the business stuff and the high risk business stuff was basically, one of the ways to cope with my depression.
Was he that father figure you'd never had before, do you think? Because it sounds like the way your relationship with him is you were actually listening for the first time as opposed to rebelling against advice.
Yeah, I didn't rebel at all. For whatever reason, he just inspired trust. I don't think I was looking for a father figure, but clearly, he was an authority figure that I respected and I paid attention to. When I got to my sort of final phase of being clean and sober and staying that way, this was one of the situations where I phoned him and said, I've given up on the drugs. I'm ready to get myself, sorted out, but I don't want to go back to treatment. Would you see me on a private basis? And he was a medical doctor, so he had a medical office. So he agreed to see me. I knew that I needed him to help me stay clean and sober. I was doing the 12-step meetings and all that good stuff, and I spent a lot of time in that community. But I knew that they couldn't help me with my mental health problems. And if I didn't solve my mental health problems, I wasn't going to be able to stay clean and sober.
One of the things that Dr. Cooney did warn you of is that your Achilles heel is the sexy savior, the siren that's going to get you to bring your ship into the port. And I think that happened to you twice with Misty and Sherelle, I guess her name was.
Yeah.
I mean, he's telling you to look out for this, and yet you seem to be this moth to a fire. So I'm curious how that all came about.
I can't justify it, but things happened serendipitously. He told me after a couple of these episodes, I'm going to end up meeting people, and for whatever reason, I'm attracted to them or they're attracted to me, and I need to be careful. I was spending a winter down in Florida. I spent some time in Key West. I met a girl at a Hard Rock Cafe because she was local. I said, I want to rent a boat and do a tour around the Keys. And she said, well, I can refer you to a couple of guys that I know. And then she ended up going out on the boat with me, and we, got together, and that sort of ended up in a relationship for about 8 weeks. But she was 26 years old. I'm still a human being, and it was hard to resist. And the thing with Sherelle, I was trying dating for a while, internet dating, and Dr. Cooney suggested I try eHarmony, which is a more, legitimate dating site. I'll give it a try for 9 months, and I'll agree to meet up to 3 women. And if it doesn't work out, I'm done with dating. I'll just go on my own kind of thing. The last girl that I met from eHarmony, lived in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, attractive young lady. And, we were getting along well, on the internet, sending me, sort of erotic pictures. And I was really tempted, but there was no way I could conceive of having a relationship with a girl in Moose Jaw. So I eventually went out there, we meet, we're having dinner. And at the end of the dinner, I said, one of the things that attracted me about you is that you're an independent businesswoman, but we never got around to finding out what business you're in. And she said, I'm Saskatchewan's only professional dominatrix. So this was another classic case of me ending up in a situation that I wasn't planning on, but meeting, exactly the wrong kind of person. I escaped unscathed. I got back to Toronto, and Dr. Cooney he couldn't stop laughing.
We come back, so much more to talk about, including Gordon having to have a difficult conversation with his 14-year-old daughter. And then we'll talk about how his path in life changed from helpless to helpful.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman. A big shout out to aspiring entrepreneurs. The Morissette Institute for Entrepreneurship, part of Western University, the Globe and Mail, and RBC have come together to create the Founder's Journey. It's an online entrepreneurial process course, and it's taught by award-winning professors. It's free, and it'll help you turn your startup dreams into reality. Go to thefoundersjourney.ca to learn more. Entrepreneurship matters to you, it matters to Canada, and it matters to RBC.
The first high is always the best. And then what you're doing is always chasing that feeling every time you use again and again and again. We were looking for a better high, a bigger high. It's never there.
Today, my special guest is Gordon Lownds, entrepreneur, creative genius, force of nature. But then he tries drugs in a very short period of time. He goes in this dangerous spiral and has to give everything he has to find his way back. The sadder part of it, you talk about in your book, because I'm a father of two daughters, it took you quite a while to rebuild trust with your daughter, Brenda.
In the last week that I was in treatment, I still hadn't told them I had a problem. And the doctor said, you really need to come clean with your family and to tell them what's going on. So I sat down over dinner with them, told them I was basically a cocaine addict or a crack addict. My daughter was devastated. She was like 14 or 15 at the time. Her image of me went from super dad to, absolutely the worst thing in the world that could happen to her. The other thing that I learned in treatment, and they coached me along the way, particularly with Dr. Cooney, is that if you want to rebuild the trust with your daughter, potentially going to take a long time, and it's not going to happen overnight, and you're going to have to work at it, and it might, it's going to be difficult. So one of the commitments I made when I got clean was that I would never, ever, ever let her down again in my life. So I was there for her when she needed me. We started to rebuild a relationship when she was about 18. She came to my 1-year anniversary of being clean and sober, and she was quite cautious about the relationship. But slowly over time, we got to the point where, she respected me, I respected her, and understood her. She started to get to the point where she not admired, but appreciated the fact that I had a problem and I was able, to get over it and return to a normal life.
And she must be very proud of the journey you went through. I mean, as disappointed as she was from that first dinner conversation, the fact that you've been clean so long, that must be something that's probably one of the most important things in your life, is how she looks at you today.
Yes, she's never expressed that to me. What she has said, and a number of people who knew me back then, who found out about my story, have said, it's really, terrible that you had to go through that. But knowing you, if anyone could get over it and get their life back on track, it would be you, just because of who you are as an individual. And I think that's how she thinks of it.
So you leave Sleep Country with all of this going on, and you talk about this void in your life, and that you had to find a way to fill this void, because you're obviously this super creative. Addiction in many ways must have fueled some of that creative thinking of your part. As you said, sometimes master depression, but you talk about outlets like poetry, Addicted to Life CD, so that music and arts start to come back into your world, not so much expressed in Sleep Country Canada jingles, but things that you're personally attached to.
The last week I was in treatment at Bellwood, I decided that I couldn't go back to work at Sleep Country. Talked to Steve about it, and I said, basically, I can't guarantee that I'll stay clean and sober, and I don't want to put you and Christine and the company at risk by stepping back into my role and then screwing up. I walked away from my high-flying career at the peak of my career and focused my attention on getting and staying clean and sober for the first, 2 to 2.5 years. The creative stuff, the music CD, the poetry, writing the memoir, I did all within the 2.5 years of getting clean and sober. And it was basically an exercise, in sort of a cathartic exercise, to get the demons out, to have a way to reflect on what happened and things that I didn't want to forget. And the memoir, I wrote it. I'm going to put it on the shelf. Basically will help me never forget where I was and the kind of, disaster I put myself through.
And it's always, when you're reading somebody else's memoir, I try to put myself in somebody's shoes. And the path that I saw you on, when you started helping people like Chelsea, the 17-year-old runaway, Paul, the Cree Nations man who threatened suicide, and you agreed to be their sponsor, even starting up Listen Up, the hearing aid business, because somebody was hard of hearing, it's almost like you shifted a role in your life from being sort of the person with the hand on the rudder, the captain of the ship, the person that, refused to take orders, to really becoming sort of this Yoda character, that I'm going to be here on this planet to help others. Was that a fair takeaway from the book?
Yeah. The thing that, my downfall did was that it was, incredibly humiliating, but it really filled me with a sense of gratitude, and I became humble. I was never particularly humble when I was being successful. And I think I carried the gratitude and the sense of humility forward. I made a lot of money at Sleep Country, donated most of it to causes that I care about. I got on the boards of, a treatment center. So I started doing things that are more socially, responsible, or at least helpful. It's time for me to help other people. I've been helping myself for too long.
And Listen Up Canada, I mean, I don't want to downplay it. I mean, you scaled this to 120 locations, really focusing on healthcare in the hearing space, sold it. I mean, did you find yourself getting addicted to that the way you were addicted to Sleep Country? Or could you now find a little bit different work-life balance where you knew that I had to care for myself if I was going to care for the business?
I was clearly a workaholic when I was, up until the end of Sleep Country. In retrospect, I've been a workaholic for a long, long time. And they say that workaholics become that way because they're basically filling an emotional void, in their life. My approach to Listen Up was far more balanced. I wasn't working insane hours. I made sure I hired people who could, share the workload. It was a much more nuanced approach to running a business. Recovery was still an important part of my life, so I was spending a good chunk of my time, in the recovery world and focusing on basically balancing my life so that I wouldn't get out of whack again.
Gord, your memoir ends with a stark warning. Addiction can happen to anyone, anytime, anywhere. What single message do you want high achievers who feel invincible? Because to me, I look at a lot of the people I've talked to that are found their way into addiction. I mean, there's some recovering from trauma and just looking for something that eases the pain, but there's also high achievers. And I'm just curious what advice you can offer others that think that they're invincible. No matter what circumstances are put in front of them, they can overcome them.
The interesting thing about publishing the memoir is I've become much more engaged in the recovery world and talking to people and still learning things. And it's recently been brought to my attention that people in high stress situations, particularly like lawyers, doctors, investment bankers, entrepreneurs, that high stress level is typically found in people who are risk prone. They're somewhat thrill seekers. They thrill seek by basically putting their lives at risk when they take chances in business. Seem to be more prone to falling prey to an addiction. When people lose track of what's important in life and who they are and what's really meaningful, then they can fall prey to things that happen. I said, I didn't plan to become an addict. I didn't plan to have a relationship with a stripper, but these things happen, and you need to be aware of danger signs when they show. And like, no one is invincible. I got stuck in that cocaine treadmill because my body chemistry happened to react very positively to cocaine. That doesn't happen to everybody. I know people who do cocaine recreationally, and they don't get into trouble with it. But my body chemistry just went through the roof, and it said, "Wow, this works for me in a huge way." And I never knew that was even possible. And as I said, when I tried cocaine, I said, "Wow, I can handle this. Nothing's ever sort of brought me down in my life before." Feeling invincible is not the best way to live your life, either from an interaction with other people point of view or just in terms of managing your own life.
I mean, I've talked to addicts in the past. They say they always chase that first high, this feeling that took over them. They saw that moment of truth, but they never find it again. Did you find that the same thing, that you were always chasing that first high?
From a body chemistry point of view, that's always true. The first high is always the best. And then what you're doing is always chasing that feeling every time you use again and again and again. And that was one of the reasons that, I graduated from doing crack to injecting. We were looking for a better high, a bigger high. It's never there.
Now, Gord, I always end with my 3 takeaways. And my first one was just how moved I was in reading your book, because a lot of what's in your DNA, I think, is in mine. And thankfully, I never tried cocaine, but the entrepreneurial, the zest for life, creativity, arts, never satisfied, always pursuing the future. And it's really wonderful to me that you found peace in the present versus, always chasing the future. And the second one, I think, is just when I referenced how you went from being, I don't take advice, I'm the captain of my ship, there's no group therapy that I could possibly be part of, they don't stack up to who I am, to finding something in your Dr. Cooney and then realizing that maybe your role on this planet was to be better served helping others. And I really saw that even in the words and how you wrote it, and the happiness it seemed you felt when you talked somebody down from suicide, or you helped the young girl with, deal with her drug dealer, that you were suddenly becoming the protector. The final thing, I guess, is just the honesty. I know you kept the memoir on the shelf for 20 years to protect your family, but I have to believe that all who knew you back then and have seen your journey over life must be very honored to know you, because you've done something that few have. Is not only have you recovered, you've gone on to recreate and, more importantly, take some of the spoils and reinvest it in helping others. So for all of that and more, I'm just delighted we could have you on Chatter That Matters.
Really appreciate it. And let me sum up my experience in a couple of simple words. In my addiction, I was hopeless, hapless, and then I became hopeful, and then I became happy. So,
once again, a special thanks to RBC for supporting Chatter That Matters. It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening, and let's chat soon.